Lyme disease spread by a growing tick population is on the rise. On the islands of Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, it's become a way of life. But an MIT scientist thinks he might have a long-term solution, and it's from where you may least expect it. Christina Quinn has more.
On the island of Nantucket, people walk their dogs and runners weave their way down the trail of ram pasture. It's a popular spot, and it's easy to see why. Hundreds of acres of untouched conservation land surround the trails. It's a peaceful setting where deer are often spotted in the early hours grazing. It's also lush territory for ticks.
If you're in an area like this, you want to stay on the beaten path, to stay away from the tall grass. Right now, it's a nice, cool day. We had rain last night. It's perfect tick questing season.
Roberto Santamaria would know. As director of the health department, he's familiar with the concerns of the community. 40% of Nantucket's 10,000 year-round residents have either had Lyme disease or are currently afflicted.
It's become part of their daily life here. Every time you go out, you go to a pasture, you go to a hike, you go to the beaches and to the dunes even, you want to go home and do a tick check. Tick checks are pretty arduous and they take a while, and even then you don't even catch all the ticks. So it's a big burden.
The problem isn't unique to Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. A study last year from the Centers for Disease Control illustrates the spread of the tick population nationwide over the last 2 decades. The northern part of the U.S. has seen a significant spike, and MIT scientist Kevin Esvelt says the solution may start with one of the main culprits, mice.
Mice are a problem. You might say, what does mice have to do with Lyme disease? Well, ticks aren't born infected. They get infected when they bite an infected host, which is usually a mouse.
The white-footed mouse, to be exact. Scientists aren't sure why, but these Northeast natives are more susceptible to contracting Lyme disease than any other animal around here. They are also abundant. Esvelt's solution? Genetically engineer them so that their immune response prevents them from being infected.
So our idea is, well, how about we take mice that are naturally immune, identify the DNA in their genomes that makes them immune, and then take the best such elements and put them all into one engineered strain of mice.
He and his team would do this using gene editing technology. But to really make a difference, it's going to take a lot of mice.
So we're talking maybe up to 100,000 mice on each island.
The idea is that when the genetically engineered mice mate with the native mice, their offspring would also be immune to Lyme disease. Over time, this would reduce the prevalence of the disease. But how do Nantucket residents feel about releasing 100,000 genetically engineered mice onto the island? For longtime resident and town selectman Jason Bridges, his initial reaction was one of disbelief.
It sounded like a bad sci-fi movie, and people kind of laughed. But the more presentations that we have in front of the Board of Selectmen, articles in the newspaper, people are like, oh, this is a real thing. I think everyone's getting used to the idea, but the initial visceral reaction was, serious? Are you serious about that?
If all goes as planned, it will be 7 years until these resistant mice are released. But the town is so serious, it has formed a steering committee to work closely with Esvelt on best practices. Esvelt expects there will be opponents along the way, but he welcomes skepticism and says he thinks major scientific endeavors like this need to be as transparent as possible.
I'm particularly passionate about that because I view this as an opportunity to work out how we as a society are going to handle these technologies. I mean, we've certainly been able to engineer the environment before. It's just we tended to do it with bulldozers or spraying lots of chemicals.
Christina Quinn joins me now. 40%?
Yeah.
That is unbelievable. So why 7? I heard you say at the end 7 years. Why 7 years from now till actual happening?
Right. Well, so first, the residents of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket need to vote in favor of this. And so that's probably going to happen in 3 to 4 years. In the meantime, he also...
3 to 4 years?
Well, these things take time. He needs to get approval from federal and state regulators. He also wants to test this out on a smaller scale. So one of the Boston Harbor Islands, for example, Bumpkin Island has a lot of ticks.
Oh. Mm-hmm. So is there... I know you talked to that selectman, but that's not a huge sample.
Right.
How do the people feel about 100,000 genetically engineered mice being set free on their island?
An army of genetically engineered mice. No, I know it sounds pretty wild, but actually there has been people are overwhelmingly in favor thus far. You know, it's still sort of off in the distant future, so you know they might change their mind along the way. But for now, they're mostly in favor. There are a few skeptics, and their main concerns are around the long-term implications on the ecosystem.
Why some, you know, why, I have mice, well, I had mice in my cave. Why are there so many mice to begin with? I don't get it.
Right, so there are a few reasons, okay? So the white-footed mouse is native to New England, but there are so many of them because they love to live on the edges of woodlands. And so if you think about the landscape in Massachusetts, we have lots of trees, we have lots of roadways, people have to, you know, build trees and lawns around their houses, so it's perfect for mice to live in. And also, there's a study out that said the huge bumper crop of acorns a couple years ago, you know, contributed to this boom in the population. So
that's too bad.
There's a lot of mice out
This is
there.
really exciting, by the way. It's a great thing. We've had Lyme disease sufferers on the show. This is a huge thing. Christina, great to see you.
Good to see you
Thanks
too.
so much.